That morning began like any other until the postman handed me a thick envelope with the council's official seal, its weight somehow heavier than the usual bills. I felt a twinge of unease as I slid it open, revealing a letter that made my blood run cold. My property was allegedly the subject of repeated complaints and at risk of losing its insurance coverage. Hey everyone, welcome back to HOA Backdoor Stories. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Before we start, let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from? And what's your HOA horror story? Let's jump into today's episode. I stared at the words in disbelief. I'd lived here for over a decade, maintaining my house meticulously, and had never had a single complaint. How could they claim otherwise? My neighbor, Mrs. Harrington, waved cheerfully from across the street, oblivious to the storm brewing in my hands. I reread the letter, noting the vague language and the implied threat that failure to respond could jeopardize my insurance. Panic flitted through me for a moment before determination set in. This wasn't just a mistake. I had seen subtle signs over the past few months that suggested the Property Management Committee was involved in something far more sinister. Workers had appeared on my lawn without notice, trimming shrubs and hedges, leaving the trimmings in a messy pile as if to provoke me. Notices arrived claiming violations I never committed, and emails from the council seemed oddly generic but consistently timed to annoy or intimidate. It slowly dawned on me that this was part of a pattern. The committee appeared to be targeting residents who questioned their authority or refused to comply blindly. My mind raced as I considered my next steps. I had to gather evidence discreetly. Any overt confrontation could escalate things. That evening, I began collecting all letters, emails, and notices from the past year, cataloging each one carefully. As I dug deeper, I noticed a pattern. Other residents had received similar warnings, often around the same time, suggesting a coordinated effort. My heart pounded as I realized the committee was manipulating council records and leveraging insurance threats to pressure homeowners financially and psychologically. I couldn't let them continue unchecked. Over the next few days, I monitored the council's communications and online records, noting discrepancies and suspicious entries. I even installed a small camera to record anyone approaching my property unexpectedly. One night, while reviewing the footage, I spotted a man lingering near my driveway, taking notes and photographs. I felt a shiver of fear, but also a surge of resolve. These were the stakes. I started reaching out discreetly to other residents, confirming that many had received similar notices, and they too feared retaliation if they spoke up. I realized that only by exposing the committee's patterns could justice be achieved. The suspense of not knowing what the committee would do next kept me awake at night, but I also felt empowered by my growing knowledge and carefully documented proof. I began drafting a timeline of events, compiling letters, emails, photographs, and notes, building a case that could withstand scrutiny. As the days passed, the psychological pressure increased. The fear of insurance cancellation, the uncertainty of false complaints, and the intrusive presence of committee watchers. But I remained calm and methodical. This quiet tension was only the beginning of a battle I was determined to win. I knew patience, precision, and courage were my only allies in this war against a covert, manipulative housing association. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to confront the committee indirectly, preparing a dossier that could expose their fraudulent practices and protect not only myself, but other residents who had been quietly victimized. The stage was set, and the suspense built with every passing hour, like storm clouds gathering over an unsuspecting neighborhood, waiting for the moment I would finally act. The next morning, I woke with a lingering unease, knowing that every moment counted. I started reviewing the council's online portal, cross-referencing my property records with the complaints listed in the letter. Each complaint was either fabricated or grossly exaggerated, and some even repeated claims from months prior. My anger boiled as I realized the committee had deliberately manipulated the system to make my home appear problematic. I noticed a subtle pattern. Every notice was timed to coincide with days when I had important appointments or commitments, almost as if to maximize disruption. Determined not to be intimidated, I contacted a few of my neighbors discreetly, seeking confirmation that their properties were not involved, But the responses were cautious, many claiming they had also received vague letters but were too scared to act. It became clear that fear was their primary weapon, and the committee relied on residents staying silent. That afternoon I received another envelope, this one stamped with "Urgent Response Required." Inside it contained a council form demanding I justify the absence of noise complaints and occupancy verification. The absurdity of it stunned me. They wanted me to prove my innocence for crimes I had not committed. I realized that this tactic was designed to exhaust me mentally and financially, forcing compliance or resignation. As I studied the documents, I discovered email headers hidden in the attachments, showing internal discussions among committee members planning how to intimidate residents into selling or abandoning properties. A thrill of vindication ran through me, proof that the harassment was intentional, coordinated, and targeted. I carefully printed every document, knowing that a paper trail would be crucial if this escalated to legal action. That evening, I reviewed the footage from my small camera again. A familiar man had been circling the street, observing several homes, not just mine. This was bigger than I thought. The committee was surveilling multiple residents to maintain leverage and suppress dissent. I began drafting a strategy: compile the evidence, contact a solicitor, and simultaneously reach out to other affected homeowners. Together, we could form a united front, making it impossible for the committee to continue its abuse unchecked. The suspense was palpable, each knock on the door or sound outside causing a jolt of anxiety, but I forced myself to stay calm and think logically. The documents showed a clear plan, and I intended to expose it. Over the next few days, I meticulously recorded every interaction with council representatives, noting their evasive answers and the subtle hints that they were aware of committee manipulation, but reluctant to intervene. I felt a growing sense of empowerment. Knowledge was my weapon, and patience my shield. By midweek, I had amassed a compelling dossier: multiple falsified complaints, repeated surveillance of my property, coordinated emails among committee members, and corroboration from at least 3 other residents. The suspense mounted as I realized I now held the power to flip the situation entirely in my favor. I carefully scheduled a meeting with my solicitor to present all the evidence, and together we planned the next steps: a formal complaint to the council, potential media exposure, and legal action if necessary. Each step had to be calculated to maximize impact while minimizing risk of retaliation. As the sun set over the quiet street, I looked at my house, the place I had lived in for years, now a focal point in a battle I had never imagined. The tension lingered, but a new feeling emerged: control. I knew that with the right strategy, I could turn the committee's intimidation tactics against them, ensuring not only my safety but the protection of other residents who had suffered silently. The suspense of waiting for the committee's next move, combined with my careful planning, made each day a test of nerves, but I felt ready. The story was unfolding, and I was finally taking the reins. The following week brought a new level of tension, and every sound outside my window now felt like a potential threat. I kept a constant watch, my camera capturing every passerby, and every envelope that arrived from the council was treated like a ticking time bomb. I noticed that the latest letters had subtle changes, carefully worded to make me doubt my own sanity. There were references to supposed complaints about noise and occupancy that didn't even exist. I cross-checked with my own records, and the falsifications were blatant. I decided it was time to escalate. I contacted my solicitor and shared the growing pile of evidence. She nodded gravely, confirming that the patterns clearly indicated deliberate manipulation by the Property Management Committee, but she warned that confronting them openly could provoke retaliation, which meant any move had to be strategic. Together, we devised a plan: compile a formal complaint for the council with documented proof of falsified reports, surveillance evidence, and witness statements from other affected homeowners. The suspense was unbearable as I realized the gravity of what I was about to do. This could either expose the committee or trigger further harassment. Over the next few days, I discreetly reached out to other residents, some hesitant, some fearful, but several agreed to share their experiences. It became clear that a network of homeowners had been quietly victimized for months, some even years. My dossier now contained multiple corroborations, each reinforcing the fact that the committee's actions were systematic, not isolated. One evening, while reviewing the footage of the street, I caught sight of a familiar car parked suspiciously across from my home. I noted the license plate and compared it with previous observations. Patterns emerged. The same individuals appeared at different times, suggesting organized surveillance. The suspense escalated, the creeping fear of retaliation always present, but my resolve strengthened. The next morning, I submitted the formal complaint to the council, attaching every piece of evidence meticulously. I detailed the timeline, the fabricated complaints, the surveillance, and the testimonies from other residents. The submission felt like a gamble. I knew the committee would try to discredit me, but the comprehensive documentation left little room for doubt. Within hours, I received acknowledgement of receipt, and a case officer was assigned to investigate. That night, I barely slept, replaying each moment, anticipating possible counterattacks. A few days later, I received a call from another resident who had been too afraid to speak until now. She confirmed she had received similar letters and notices, and she was willing to provide her documents to strengthen our case. The suspense compounded as I realized the scale of the committee's deception. Dozens of homes could be affected, and the council had been unknowingly complicit due to falsified records. I began to strategize how to publicize the findings without compromising the investigation. The tension between waiting for the council's response and the constant fear of retaliation was a psychological battlefield, but I felt empowered by the growing support network. I could almost feel the committee watching. Unaware that their tactics had been documented and exposed, the suspense built daily, every letter, every knock on the door, every unusual car on the street, a reminder that the battle was far from over. Yet the knowledge that our evidence was solid and our legal approach meticulous gave me a sense of control. I could see the turning point approaching, and I knew that the next few weeks would determine whether justice would prevail or the committee's intimidation would succeed. The tension, the anxiety, and the meticulous planning became a rhythm, a daily suspense that kept me alert, focused, and ready. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought lingered. Soon the committee would realize that the homeowner they underestimated had taken command, and their hidden manipulations were about to be brought into the light. The council finally responded after a week of anxious waiting, their email brief but acknowledging that an investigation had been opened based on my complaint. I felt a mixture of relief and tension, knowing that this was only the beginning. The Property Management Committee, unaware that their tactics had been meticulously documented, continued their subtle intimidation. Workers appeared in the neighborhood, and vague notices of minor infractions kept arriving. I maintained my composure, silently observing, collecting, and cataloging every piece of evidence, knowing that the smallest oversight could give them leverage. I also coordinated with other affected homeowners, exchanging notes and records discreetly, building a united front that was impossible to ignore. The suspense was almost unbearable. Every interaction with the council required careful wording, every document had to be flawless. One evening I noticed another suspicious car parked near my home, identical to one I had seen before. I quickly recorded the license plate and added it to my growing dossier, realizing that the committee's surveillance was persistent but predictable. My solicitor advised me to compile the evidence into a comprehensive timeline, demonstrating the systematic harassment, the falsified complaints, and the council's unwitting complicity. It was painstaking work, but I understood that this was the only way to ensure accountability. I also decided to draft a press-ready statement summarizing the situation without revealing sensitive personal information, preparing for potential media attention. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Whispers of strange letters and unexplained fines circulated among residents, but most still remained silent out of fear. Knowing that we now had multiple corroborating testimonies, I felt a renewed sense of empowerment. Late one night, as I reviewed the latest batch of emails and letters, I noticed a pattern. The committee had targeted residents who had voiced concerns previously, trying to isolate them psychologically. It was insidious and manipulative, but with my documentation, it was impossible to deny. I felt the suspense like a tightrope stretching over an abyss. One misstep could undo all progress. Over the next several days, the council began contacting other affected residents, requesting their records and statements, validating my suspicions that the committee had systematically abused their power. Each new confirmation from neighbors added both suspense and confidence. Our united front was growing stronger, and the committee's shadow of intimidation began to waver. I meticulously prepared a final dossier, combining my evidence with statements from other homeowners, photographs, letters, and surveillance records. Every detail reinforced the narrative of intentional, coordinated harassment. The suspense reached its peak when I submitted the completed package to the council, knowing that this could either finally bring justice or provoke a desperate response from the committee. The night after submission, I barely slept, my mind racing with what-ifs and contingency plans. Every passing hour brought the potential for the committee to attempt another subtle attack, but I remained vigilant. The suspense was electric. I knew that the exposure was imminent, and that the committee's carefully hidden actions were about to be revealed to both the council and potentially the public. The sense of empowerment grew alongside the tension, each moment of uncertainty sharpening my resolve. I felt poised at the edge of victory, the hours crawling by as the council reviewed our case. The suspense of waiting, the anticipation of accountability, and the strategic patience I had maintained since the first threatening letter now culminated in a turning point. Soon the committee would no longer operate in the shadows, and justice for our neighborhood would be undeniable. The days following the submission of my comprehensive dossier were a tense waiting game, each sunrise and sunset stretching the suspense as the council reviewed our evidence. I kept watch over my property, though the intrusive surveillance had noticeably lessened, perhaps because the committee sensed that their actions were finally being scrutinized. Then came the call I had been waiting for. The council wanted to meet in person to discuss the findings. I arrived at the local municipal office, clutching a folder containing every document, email, letter, and photograph I had meticulously collected. Sitting in the sterile meeting room, I presented my case, detailing each false complaint, the orchestrated surveillance, and the pattern of intimidation targeting multiple residents. As I spoke, I noticed the expression on the case officer's face shift from polite skepticism to clear concern. The evidence was undeniable. Soon after, the council began notifying other affected homeowners, requesting statements and confirmations, officially validating the pattern of harassment. The suspense was electric. I felt both relief and nervous anticipation, knowing the committee would likely try a final push to discredit us. Within a week, the council issued formal fines against the Property Management Committee, citing abuse of authority, falsification of records, and intimidation tactics. The committee was ordered to provide a public apology to all affected residents, and policies were immediately revised to prevent future abuses. News of the ruling spread quietly at first, then began to circulate in the neighborhood. I received messages from other residents, expressing relief and gratitude for bringing the issue into the light. The suspense finally began to dissipate as the reality set in. Justice had been served. My insurance was confirmed safe and intact, no further notices arrived, and the street regained its calm. Yet the psychological relief was profound. The community had been empowered, aware that collective vigilance and careful documentation could challenge even the most manipulative authorities. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized how subtly the committee had orchestrated fear, letters, fines, surveillance, all designed to pressure, isolate, and intimidate residents. But through patience, meticulous evidence gathering, and strategic legal action, we had flipped the narrative entirely. The climax, once unimaginable, had arrived in the form of accountability, public acknowledgement, and systemic changes within the council and housing association. The suspense had been sustained for weeks, but the resolution brought a satisfying payoff. The neighborhood now understood that the shadow of intimidation could be confronted and dismantled. I returned home that evening, stepping through the front door with a sense of triumph and calm. The windows glinted in the late afternoon sun, and the familiar quiet of the street reinforced that normalcy had returned. Yet the experience left a lasting impression, not only on me, but on all the residents who had suffered silently. Through courage, strategy, and persistence, we had confronted the abuse of authority and emerged victorious. The Property Management Committee would no longer be able to operate in the shadows, and our story now served as a cautionary tale for the neighborhood. As I sat in my living room reflecting on the weeks of tension, letters, surveillance, and sleepless nights, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The suspense that had gripped our lives was over, replaced by relief, justice, and a community strengthened by shared vigilance. The battle had been hard fought, but the payoff was undeniable. The council acknowledged their role, the committee faced consequences, and homeowners reclaimed their peace of mind. The story of our struggle, once a tale of fear and intimidation, had transformed into one of empowerment, courage, and ultimate triumph, leaving the neighborhood forever changed and the HOA's tactics fully exposed. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. See you in the next episode.